something to ask about today, because there most certainly is. You can text your question to 84850 and you can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC, and please do watch us on Global Player 2.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, the One Nation group of Conservative MPs says it'll vote in favour of the government's Rwanda bill tomorrow, while the European research group of Tory Brexiteers is concerned the legislation could be vulnerable to legal challenges. Conservative MP David Simmons chairs the all-party parliamentary group on migration. He's told LBC he feels a consensus is possible.
We all want to see legislation that will help stop people putting their lives at risk crossing the English Channel. Now, clearly, there will be differences of opinion. That's the purpose of Parliament. It's there to iron out those differences. But we need to make sure that this legislation is fit for purpose when it goes through.
The Prime Minister's told the COVID inquiry the Eat Out to Help Out scheme protected workers from devastating job losses during the pandemic. Rishi Sunak, who was Chancellor at the time, has been defending it while giving evidence. A report into a data breach at the Police Service of Northern Ireland has found outdated practices were to blame. The Chief Constable resigned after the details of almost 9,500 officers and staff were mistakenly published in August. And countries at the COP28 Climate Change Summit have been given the draft text of a final deal which doesn't directly refer to the phasing out of fossil fuels. The talks in Dubai are due to finish tomorrow. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 9 points at 75.44. The pound buys $1.25 and €1.16. LBC weather, chilly in the north and east tonight. Heavy rain spreading eastwards from the west with a low of -1. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Charlotte Morgan.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, very good evening. 2 minutes past 8 on LBC. Welcome to Monday's Cross Question. On the panel with me, to my right, Ava Vidal, who's a comedian and journalist. Next to her, Paul Drechsler, chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce. We'll find out what that does. Probably does what it says on the tin, I guess. And former president of the CBI. To my left, Beth Winter is Labour MP for Cynon Valley, member of the Socialist campaign group of Labour MPs. And next to her, Bob Seeley, Conservative MP for the Isle of Wight. They are here to... we don't normally have a little wave from people there. Bob, well done. They've just been very friendly. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. If you were watching on Global Player, you would have seen that magnificent hand wave from Bob there. We might get other hand gestures from other panellists during the course of the show. You never know. Worth tuning into Global Player to find out. And you can send a comment to LBC via Alexa. So lots to ask about. We've got lots of calls coming in already, but keep them coming. 0345 6060 973.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's go to our first caller. It's Daryl in Chesterfield. Daryl, hi. What would you like to ask?
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel. One of the things that concerns me, which I don't hear discussed very much, is if we send people to Rwanda, and this is thanks to your colleague, how are they going to assimilate to a different culture, a different language? Are they going to be subject to racism, attacks? Are we going to pay for them to have language training? Because a lot of these people, if they go there, won't even be able to speak to each other. They might be seen as living in luxury. And Rwanda, despite what's said, is not a rich country. They have their poor. They don't have access to televisions or even radios. They think, who are these people? I'm just putting this out there because I haven't heard this discussed very much, how they're going to assimilate.
OK. Well, it's an interesting question. So I suppose to wrap all that together, is this scheme inherently unethical for the reasons that Daryl has articulated there? Beth Winter.
Well, this scheme is totally unethical and immoral, and we still don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. The government are in disarray. There are different factions, some of whom are going to support the bill, others are clearly in opposition to it. This bill is totally unworkable. It is in breach of international law. It overrules the Supreme Court's own judgment only last month in our country that the scheme is unworkable. It is completely immoral. What we should be doing instead is securing safe and legal routes for migrants who are fleeing absolutely horrendous circumstances to be able to come to our country safely. We need to clear the backlog, the hundreds of thousands of people who are waiting for their asylum claims to be processed. And we need what we've got in Wales, which is a nation of sanctuary. This scheme is absolutely abhorrent, and my party and I will be opposing it strongly in its entirety tomorrow.
You haven't actually answered the question, though. I mean, that's all well and good, but the question was about, is it unethical to send people to Rwanda, bearing in mind that they won't know the culture, they won't know the languages, and will they be able to assimilate?
The Supreme Court determined last month that this policy is unworkable because of the concerns about the safety of people going to that country. That is significant. That is a serious issue. In terms of assimilation to any culture, we must welcome migrants to our country and any country in which they are fleeing to, and ensure that there is systems and processes in place to enable people to assimilate. Rwanda is not a safe country as determined by the Supreme Court last month.
Bob Seeley.
What was the name of the caller again? Sorry.
Darryl.
Darryl, thanks for your question. I mean, you say, well, you know, there's such a difficult thing about assimilating Rwanda. I mean, you could say that you're making an assumption that everyone can suddenly assimilate in this country. We have assimilation problems as well. So I think you're being a little bit condescending to Rwandans, just in order of some of the points raised. Firstly, look, I mean, you're talking about factions within the Tory party. You are actually from a hard left faction within the Labour Party.
Hard left?
Yeah, hard left. Secondly, there are 9 safe and legal routes into this country. 9. The problem is, when you start talking about this issue, suddenly facts just seem to fly out the window and everything's either abhorrent and immoral. There are 9 safe and legal routes. That's a reality. We've had nearly 500 legal refugees since 2015. That's an extraordinarily generous figure.
500?
500,000.
All right.
Sorry, 500,000. Yeah, I mean,
I was going to say, 500 would not be
a population
very
over
generous.
twice the size of Portsmouth. It's a population nearly getting on for the size of Manchester. We've had 500,000 legal migrants here, something approaching that, on top of the... that's refugees, on top of legal migration. When it comes to Rwanda, look, I'm sorry, I disagree with what the Supreme Court said, Darren, and I disagree with it because I thought it was a highly political decision, and I'll tell you why. And I base it on the evidence. The UNHCR was quoted as basically providing evidence that Rwanda was unsafe. That is because the UNHCR doesn't like this policy. What the Supreme Court didn't tell you is that the UNHCR uses Rwanda because they deem it to be a safe haven for refugees in other countries. And anyone, I urge them now to go onto the UNHCR refugee site for Rwanda, as I have done, and you will see all these pretty pictures about helping to get people acclimatised to Rwandan society, getting them fitting into Rwandan society. So on one hand, the left are saying, Rwanda's this horrible, dangerous place in the middle of Africa, it's really unsafe. When you've got the UNHCR saying, actually, it's really good because we're taking refugees from other parts of the world, be it Libya, be it Congo, be it Burundi, I think, as well, and actually assimilating them in Rwanda. So if you go and look at the evidence, the evidence says something different.
But isn't it rather disgraceful for you to accuse the Supreme Court of this country of being political? Yeah, I mean, we've been here before, haven't we, with the enemies of the people and all the rest of it. It undermines confidence by ordinary British people in public institutions, and you shouldn't be doing that with the Supreme Court.
I do that because I think the evidence is there to suggest that it was, for me, a really odd comment, because what they didn't say for one second, I listened very, very carefully to the judgment, and the judgment was entirely, the UNHCR says this. The UNHCR, which is United Nations High Commission for Refugees, says this, says that Rwanda is unsafe. And yet at no point did the UNHCR say, at no point did the Supreme Court say, but by the way, the Rwanda is used by the UNHCR because it is deemed to be a safe haven. So I don't see why something's a dangerous place for us and a safe haven for the UNHCR when they want to house and rehouse and assimilate refugees safely into another African country. Nobody's explained that to me, so I'm sceptical about the Supreme Court's judgment, very.
You can say you're sceptical about a judgment, but to accuse them of being political, do you not see undermines the whole institution of the judiciary?
Iain, that is my opinion. I think it was a really contrary verdict, and I thought it was a disturbing one. And what we've had a lot of, especially from the ECHR, is judicial activism and the lack of respect for the political processes and for a sovereign state to make these decisions. And so I'm happy to vote to declare Rwanda a safe haven tomorrow, because that is exactly what the United Nations does itself.
Lots of sighing coming from my right here with Ava.
Was I? I did not even know. I really was not conscious I was doing that.
Yeah, sorry.
I am so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Wasn't criticism.
I completely disagree. I mean, when it comes to Rwanda, I mean, the place where they went out and they visited and they were going to lodge these refugees are actually places that people who are survivors of the genocide are living. They are going to root these people out, destabilise their whole entire lives to bring these people who we don't want into this country to go over there. Yes, there is going to be an assimilation problem. There's also it's going to create so many issues for Rwandans over there. If you just have a set of people who are coming in, and who have no tie to the country. A lot of people who come to Britain have got ties here, they've got a family here, they've got community here. I mean, we're going to argue day and night about assimilation. There are assimilation problems, but you would think that they were just one way. Sometimes people just don't want refugees, and when you hear people speak like this, and when you have, and I think your figures are a bit off as well, and when you have people who are coming to this country and the news have whipped up this kind of hatred against them, how do you expect them to assimilate smoothly? These things kind of take time.
But in Rwanda, they're only going to be taking 100 at a time. I wouldn't have thought it was that difficult to assimilate 100 people. If it was 10,000, that might be different.
I don't think so. I think that there are going to be assimilation problems, because Rwandans are going to be like, hold on a second, we were living in these apartments here. We were with the children of people killed in the genocide. We've been told to move. Already you're displacing people. That's going to get them angry. How exactly are they going to integrate? Are they going to sit down and give them lessons in the different languages? Rwandans don't speak just one language. These are very hard languages to master after a certain age. How are they going to do it? It's just not on. The whole thing is just disgraceful.
Paul Drechsler.
Look, you cannot believe that Great Britain, Magna Carta, one of the countries in the world most respected for democracy, the rule of law. People come from all around the world here to study law. We have some of the best judges, most respected in the world. And I think the news has been dominated by Rwanda for so many weeks now I've forgotten. How can we spend so much time on this issue when there are 13 million people living in poverty, 4 million of them children? We've lost our sense of perspective.
But if we don't cover it, then we in the media get accused of doing the government's dirty work.
Covering it because the government are insisting that it dominates the media. That's why you're covering.
Sorry, that is absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. You're saying that the government secretly controls the agenda in this country? Absolutely.
Okay, let Paul have his say, and then we can have a discussion.
Well, I won't ask how many press releases have been issued per week over the past 52 weeks. But I do think there's something about the standing of this nation in global terms. We have some of the best universities. We have one of the best capital cities in the world. Why? Because of the diversity of people in this city. What have we done? We've taken refugees from Hong Kong, from Ukraine, which demonstrates the huge big heart of the people of this country. Many of the people who come here are coming to work on our national health and our care services.
They're coming here legally. What the government is talking about here is people who are coming over the channel I mean, we can question whether we should use the word illegal, but they are being effectively trafficked here by people who are earning money out of it.
Can I just give the figures?
Just two things. These are human beings we are talking about. Human beings. The tone of our conversation, the narrative that we've adopted in this country. If you're living in Africa or you're living in Australia or Japan, you're not dissecting this language. We sound like a country that hates foreigners. That's what we sound like outside the UK, and we are not. Okay. And I think the narrative does a disservice.
Can I also just say quickly, Ian, that they've only been counting the small boats, so the whole driving force is, oh my gosh, we're so worried. It's people trafficking. We're so worried about these people. They've been counting the numbers since 2018. Last year, there were 45,700 people arrived. To the end of this year, there's only 27,300. The numbers are dropping anyway. Sorry?
Down by a third. Yeah, I agree.
Right, so the way that they're driving this, like it's just this overwhelming problem, and we're
But they could say, well, because of the Rwanda issue, that's part of the reason why the numbers have dropped by a third.
There's no evidence.
Because they'll say it's a deterrent.
There's no evidence of that at all. I mean,
why has it dropped then?
Sorry?
Why has the number dropped by a third if Rwanda's got nothing to do with it?
I don't agree that that's the reason.
I'm asking you, what is the reason?
I can't tell you what the exact reason is.
Well, I can tell you why. Because if you think about this country from outside the UK, we sound like a hostile nation. I mean, there's no correlation between the narrative and tone of our conversation in this country and the sort of country we are.
Okay, Beth.
We're doing ourselves a disservice.
I agree with the comments. This is a distraction by the Tory government in the middle of a cost-of-living crisis, without a doubt. But let's not forget, this is the third time that the Tories are trying to put this bill through Parliament. And it's going to fail again because despite what...
the other bills haven't failed. They've got through Parliament.
But
they
then
just
they've been
haven't had a huge
challenged.
impact.
It's not going to be implemented because it clearly is in breach of UK and international law. I've just come from a briefing by eminent lawyers in Parliament, all of whom are clearly saying that this is in breach of the law, and it really does have serious consequences for our judiciary that the Tory party is trying to circumvent the legislation and the judiciary of our country. It is very, very worrying what the Tories are trying to do, and they're in disarray. You know, there is no unity within the Tory party.
Passing a new act of Parliament, I mean, that's not threatening the judiciary. That's what Parliament is there to do, to legislate. And if Parliament thinks the courts are getting it wrong, it's entirely within its right to legislate,
But it's already been twice, and it's already been challenged legally twice, and it's been found only last month by the Supreme Court that it is in breach of legislation of human rights because it's not a safe country. And yet again, we're trying a third time to push this through Parliament.
Bob?
Mm-hmm. I've just checked the figures on legal on refugees since 2015, and it's 480,000. So that's the figure, and that was from last year. So what was the point you wanted to ask me, Ian?
I thought you wanted to make a point.
Yeah, just to comment on... Look, I'm sorry. To say that we are unfriendly towards refugees is just completely ignores the fact that we've taken in 480,000 since 2015. It ignores the fact that actually people like me were saying to Priti Patel when she was Home Secretary, we need to act for B&O passport holders. We need to do the honourable thing by folks in Hong Kong.
But the point Paul was making here, I think, is a valid one.
Yep.
When you have a Home Secretary, or had a Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, who referred to a hurricane and used very unfortunate language on many, many occasions, I can completely understand why Paul thinks what he thinks. Because, I mean, she's a Home Secretary. She's not an ordinary backbench member of Parliament. She was the Home Secretary, effectively insulting people who, for whatever reasons, wish to come to this country.
She also put it through as an executive order. It wasn't actually voted on. It was put through as an executive order, wasn't it? The Rwanda policy?
No.
I don't think there's been any legislation up to now, has there?
I can't remember, sorry, I should...
I mean,
a government is perfectly capable of putting through policies. Not everything has to be legislated for. That is true.
In the point I would make is this, that actually we've taken in huge numbers of people through our obligations to Hong Kong, through our obligations and support for Ukraine. We've taken in 500,000, 480,000 refugees since 2015. These are vast numbers of people The overwhelming majority are going to be contributing to our society, which is great. But at the same time, we're taking in 700,000 legal migrants. People have never voted for these policies, and I do think we are pushing people. And everyone is saying that, oh my God, how can people possibly...
Who's been in government for the last 13 years and has allowed this situation to happen?
I get that. I'm just saying that we need to actually deliver much... Well, you could say that this has actually been going on for the past 25 years, and I think we need to take much more...
Maybe, just maybe, your own party should not be making promises about tens of thousands of immigrants when they must have known that they were never going to achieve that. And maybe both of your party leaders, and I include Keir Starmer in this too, ought to show a little bit of leadership rather than trying to follow public opinion and explain why immigration is generally a good thing for this country.
And Iain, sorry, could I just say, it is about the language of leadership, and I think you're 100% right. The language of leadership is what sets the tone for this country internationally, and sets the tone for it.
I'm going to show some leadership now by saying we have to go to a break. It's 21 minutes past 8.
This is LBC.
Residents.
Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
24 minutes past 8 on LBC. Conservative MP Bob Seeley, Beth Winter, Labour MP Paul Drechsler, Chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce, and Ava Vidal is here, comedian. I knew I'd get it wrong.
It's okay, don't worry.
I started off with Ava, then we went to Ava, and we've ended up on what you're really called, so I'm going to try and get it right for the rest of the programme, I promise.
I was a prison officer. I've been called worse.
I mean, how many ways can a three-letter word be pronounced? Right, let's go to another caller. It's Martin in Doncaster. Hello, Martin.
Hello, Iain and panel. Is it worth spending more money on inquiries, and is it too late to learn lessons from the pandemic?
Paul.
Well, I think that's a really, really great question. I think there are some fabulous lessons to be learned from the way we used our science to solve problems in record time. So from no solution to design, development, pilot, large-scale manufacture, distribution into people's arms. If we could do that with medicine all the time, we could make a profound difference to the world. So I think there are some good lessons to be learned from it. In the inquiry to date, which somebody told me is about £1 billion of expenditure, most of what I've heard so far has been about the character of some of the politicians involved. And I'm not sure we have learned anything new in the inquiries so far. So the question might be, how do we turn this massive investment into an advantage for this country? And if we could turn our brilliant science into more commercialization, more solutions, we could add about 230 billion to the economy by 2030. So there's a big prize by capitalizing on the lessons. And that's what I would encourage us to. But you know, every day to be hearing about the character of people we've read about for 3 years.
It's tittle-tattle, isn't it?
Well, the villains, and it's self-evident from the inquiry that, you know, we were being looked after by a bunch of people who did not do their duty in the way we might reasonably have expected. And I don't think we're adding value in terms of the process. And I'm very sad about that, because I think every person I've met who has had family involved in COVID and who lost members of the family is devastated and highly upset by this whole process. And I can't see who we're serving.
But you can't, on the one hand, say, well, wasn't it great about the vaccine and how well we did on that? And then, on the other hand, say, well, we've been led by effectively a bunch of incompetents, because they weren't incompetent on the vaccine bit of it.
Well, the people who led the process for the vaccine were actually pulled out from the world of business, who knew how to get stuff done, who knew how to take decisions, and were recognised for that leadership. And, you know, the politicians got out of the way, and for that we should be very grateful.
And they appointed them in the first place.
And they appointed them.
Okay, Bob?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, that's a fair point about private business, but the politicians told them to get on with it and actually supported them and included them. So I thought that was a really important decision. I'm afraid to say, I think, Paul, I think this is so far earmarked to cost 250 million, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if it goes the wrong side of 500. I'm going to be sceptical about this, and again, afraid I think it's a complete waste of money. And I think the remit of the inquiry is just wrong. The remit should be to look at the actual true cost of lockdown, because if you go to any school now, you will talk to head teachers, as I was doing on Friday, about the lack of socialisation that kids have had locked with their parents for a year plus. You look at the disastrous modelling from Imperial College, and I'm a huge fan of science, but the modellers who predicted, almost certainly inaccurately, the 500,000 dead were the same people who predicted absurd casualty rates for foot and mouth. And that modelling is now absolutely being slated, not by politicians, but it is being slated in peer-reviewed documents. So I think the modelling was disastrous. I think lockdown on balance will prove to probably have cost us more in terms of lives, in terms of mental health, in terms of the economy, which is important.
But that's part of the remit of the inquiry.
No, not really.
Yes, it is. The timing of the lockdowns, did they last too long?
No, but so much of it is it's sort of practically about why didn't we lock down sooner? And actually there is an issue about whether lockdowns was the right response, looking at the Swedish model. Okay? The one time, let me just finish the third point. So lockdowns we need to look at, were they worth it? Modelling, why was it so wrong? And thirdly, the oranges of it, because that is important in itself. And if, as very potentially likely, it came from a lab in China, that is really important for stuff like biosecurity in future. And if it was a spliced, so human engineered natural virus, that is also really important, because
but an inquiry of this nature it can never be designed to be definitive about that, can it?
No, but if you're asking me what I think it should be focusing on, as Paul said, at the moment it's tittle-tattle.
All right, Ava.
I'd like it focused on stuff that matters.
Yeah, I'd like it to focus on stuff that matters as well. I had a child that was due to start school and we were in lockdown, and so she had to stay home for longer than she should have before she actually got started. I think also thing that you're missing out is we're speaking about the mental health. We're still talking about lockdown, how damaging it was, how awful it was. I think a lot of the money went to bad contracts. A lot of the money went on bad PPE. A lot of money went in contracts to people who were not qualified to be supplying things like that. That was the whole thing with Matt Hancock, who was giving contracts to friends. There was a lot of that was going on as well. So I think if you want to mention the lockdown...
Which he denies.
I mean, people saw the messages. We saw... I mean, Michelle Monet is complaining as well at the moment, saying that she's been unfairly treated. I mean, there were some contracts that were given out that shouldn't have been.
Beth?
Well, what was disastrous was the way in which the Tory government managed the COVID pandemic, which led to one of the highest death rates in the entire world.
That is just untrue. It's just untrue. It's just untrue.
It was extremely high.
It's just
we
untrue.
had in excess. Far too many people died, and having spent a lot of time with the COVID families, there is no price to be put on a human being's life. And as already been said, there was hundreds of millions of pounds handed to the Tories' cronies, and I think this inquiry is essential in order to uncover what went wrong. Ultimately, it's the implementation of the findings that is important so that we never have this situation arising again.
But do you think it will satisfy anyone? I mean, I listened to some of the families being interviewed before the proceedings start, and I think to myself, there is nothing that either Boris Johnson, Rishi Sunak, Matt Hancock, or indeed the chair of the inquiry can say that will lessen the pain, that will give them some sort of closure on this. So if that can't happen, what was the point of it?
The families want the inquiry, and I think it's incumbent that, the inquiry takes place for that fact alone. There's also the whole issue of accountability. Now, we had Rishi Sunak today, who was fined during lockdown, and then he's trying to defend the Take Out to Eat Out scheme, which according to the Chief Medical Officer...
So let's not go into that now.
But in terms of accountability, people have to be held accountable for the mistakes that were made, and mistakes are being exposed during the course of this inquiry. But I'm really concerned to ensure that whatever findings and whatever outcomes are implemented so that we don't have this again. That is really important. That it's not an inquiry for the sake of inquiry, that action is...
Right, lots more questions to come. 0345 6060 973. And as Beth rightly anticipated there, we are going to have one on Eat Out to Help Out in just a couple of moments. It's 8:33. News headlines on LBC with Charlotte Morgan.
A former Conservative Party chairman has told LBC tougher Rwanda legislation could jeopardise Brexit. David Davis says making it more problematic could force the EU to abandon our free trade agreement. The Prime Minister's told the COVID inquiry the Eat Out to Help Out scheme protected workers from devastating job losses. Rishi Sunak, who was Chancellor at the time, has been defending it while giving evidence. And the draft text of a final deal given to countries at the COP28 Climate Change Summit doesn't directly refer to the phasing out of fossil fuels. It's a key demand from the EU and many developing nations. LBC weather. Heavy rain spreading eastwards from the west overnight with a low of -1. Frequent heavy showers tomorrow, a high of 12.
LBC. website. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:35. Bob Seeley, Conservative MP, Beth Winter, Labour MP, Paul Drechsler, Chairman of the International Chamber of Commerce, and Ava Vidal are with us. Now, Ava, I was doing my research on you earlier, and I read on Wikipedia that you used to be a prison officer.
I did, yeah, I did.
Which
5 years.
I was slightly surprised at, because it's a bit of an untypical route to go from prison officer to comedian, isn't it? I suppose you got quite a lot of material from it.
Good material.
Yeah. I got some good material from it. Yeah, I went from boarding school to prison officer to comedian to journalist to all over the place. Yeah, I have range.
You certainly do. I mean, what was that experience like?
It was okay. I wouldn't like to do the job now. I mean, I was speaking on another TV show about it recently, with all the changes that are being made. I was speaking about the fact that they're just so full. I mean, I wouldn't like to do it now. The conditions are really, really bad. They don't give accommodation to prison officers anymore. When I first started, they used to do cross-recruiting, so you'd have northern officers in London. You'd swap over, so that you were less likely to lock up your mates and people you went to school with, and less likely for people to know your family history and be able to threaten you. All of that stopped now. It's a much more dangerous job. I think every prisons minister that comes in always wants to put his mark on it, or her mark on it, and they do some ridiculous things. I remember a while back when I was at the Telegraph writing about Chris Grayling wanting to ban books, and I was like, my God, please don't do that. Prison officers will go crazy. You can't ban books from, they put all these things in that make the job really, really hard for people. And I think that, they should get people with a little bit more experience to advise them.
I remember when that was announced, and I sat here basically doing a rant at the camera saying what a disgrace this was.
It was.
And Chris Grayling then texted me and said, no, we're not banning books. I said, no, you literally are.
They were, yeah.
But anyway, that's another subject. Right, let's go to a text question from Julian Bolton, who says, Rishi Sunak suggests Eat Out to Help Out was worth it to save jobs in hospitality. Was it? Well, let's go to businessman Paul Drechsler.
So I see this from two sides. I think the first is, if you're in a position of senior leadership, you have to take advice from all quarters, whatever role you do. And I was very concerned that both our senior medical officer, senior scientist, said they were not consulted about that scheme. However, I remember incredibly well, I was at that time also chairman of London First Business London, and the amount of pressure from business on the Chancellor to just do something to get the economy going was phenomenal. And I'm sure he was being bombarded from every quarter. And I'm sure that the idea of Eat Out to Help Out was not hatched in number 11. I'm sure it came from some brilliant business minds. But again, with the benefit of hindsight, if we're going to do things like that, we have to take on board all the advice. And it's very clear, no matter what way you look at it, every country in the world, we know high concentrations of people with COVID accelerate the infection rate. And if there was a high rate of COVID at the time, it clearly wasn't the smartest thing to do.
You talk as if Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance were sort of shrinking violets. They could have intervened here, but chose not to.
That I do not know. But if I was going to take look, these decisions were all big decisions. Nobody, I think, is suggesting this period of COVID was at all easy. Far from it. But we did have two of the most respected scientists in the world, not just in the UK, I might add, and others available, some of the most distinguished scientists in the world, and their advice, I'm afraid, was very clear. And there are one or two countries in the world that were exceptions, but every well-developed country in the world with high-density populations, where the UK is unique, we have large numbers of people in many cities. It was just not smart to be crowding people into places when COVID was at high rates.
But they were also both the people at the beginning who did not want a lockdown, and they were quite happy for some of these big public events to go ahead.
Well,
so, again, you can't just sort of say, well, they were brilliant scientists and all the rest of it. Yeah. Nobody knew at that time.
Well...
Though I remember, again, sitting in the studio, talking to people and saying, why is Cheltenham being allowed to go ahead? Why is the Liverpool match being allowed to go ahead?
What I can tell you with clear memory is most of the Fortune 500 companies that were in the UK had already locked down 2 weeks before the UK government decided. Most countries in Europe were a couple of weeks ahead of us. And most people would agree today that the 1 or 2 weeks delay probably cost us about 100,000 lives, which we might have lost.
Okay.
I think that's the case.
Beth.
I agree with everything that has been said, really. Rishi Sunak did not seek the advice of the experts who were employed to give that advice. Whether or not they should have intervened, hopefully the inquiry will be able to investigate that as well. But it did result in further death. And as others on the panel would have done themselves, speaking to people who've lost family members, it is absolutely priceless. We were able to afford the furlough scheme. We're a rich nation. We could and should have assisted business more if that is what required, if that was what was required at the time.
Okay, Bob.
Okay, I just disagree with what's being said. Vallance and Whitty were not fans of lockdown until the flawed modelling produced 500,000 dead. The only time that modelling, Imperial College modelling, was tested was in the run-up to the third or fourth lockdown, when the government said, no, we don't believe you. At the time, the modelling was going to predict a minimum of 100,000 cases. It topped at 32,000 briefly. So the modelling was absolutely flawed. It is very, very easy for everyone here to make political points or to be wise with the use of hindsight. It was an incredibly... And I'm about to do the same in part. There were alternatives. To say that every scientist said this, sorry, not true. The Swedish said, actually, what we're going to do, and they have population density roughly the same as ours.
No, they really don't.
They do
No,
not.
they do not.
Sorry, they do. Because most people in
You've
Sweden...
been Googling, let me do some Googling.
Most people in Sweden... No, but Ian, most people in Sweden live in urban areas in the south of the country. In relation to its size, they have a much lower average population density. But in the cities and in the urban areas, the population density is similar.
The biggest city in Sweden has a fraction of the population of most of our cities.
If you look at population density in their urban areas, they are not dissimilar to the European average, okay? You have very few people living in the woods. And the Swedes went down a different route. And I think we probably had no option but to go down lockdown for the first route. I think a lot of people have argued that if this had not come from China, the world might have taken a different approach, because China is a totalitarian society. You lock people down, and they kept on locking people down until people were, even in a totalitarian one-party state, were on the edge of rebelling, because lockdowns in China were lasting much longer than they were in the UK. And this goes back to, I'm afraid, the argument, which, I mean, we started to be concerned about a year after lockdown happened, which is that lockdown was causing more problems than it tried to solve. And I wish we had gone down after the first lockdown. I wish we had said, right, we're now going to move to protect people better that need protection, and do, frankly, a better job than was done on the care homes. But everyone else, they're literally, the amount of healthy people under the age of 50 who died was, I think, in the few dozens or low hundreds. And actually, by having that so-called herd immunity, which became an incredibly unpopular expression very quickly, which we probably should have renamed community immunity, by having that immunity amongst young people, you would have had a barrier to when it swept through our country.
The population density in Sweden is 26 people per square kilometre. In the United Kingdom, it's 280.
Yeah, I mean, I've given you an answer to that. Most people don't live in the woods in Sweden. So
well, maybe they do. I mean,
take an average.
You are right to the extent that in Stockholm it's 5,200 per square kilometre, and in London it's 5,800.
And Sheffield.
I was just going to say, I don't think it's fair to criticise the scientists for changing their mind as more information became available.
But we criticise the politicians for changing their minds. So why shouldn't we criticise scientists?
No, but
as more information became available, it was not, it wasn't something that we'd all lived through before. Look, I didn't particularly enjoy lockdown. I know a lot of people who work in the hospitality industry. Our industry, the comedy industry, it was dead. It was absolutely dead. Like, people were worried. I know people who work in restaurants, who are performers. I've obviously got a lot of friends in the arts. It was absolutely awful for us as well. I understand the eat out to help out, and I did eat out a lot. And but I mean, gosh, so sometimes mistakes were being made. I think that that we can just try and be a little bit more generous towards each other. Nobody knew what was going on. There was information flying at us from all around. And actually, I don't blame Rishi because, like I said, I know people in that industry who were really, really grateful for... Well, I blame Rishi. Anyway. But I for that particular... I understood where they were coming from and why they did it. I'm sorry for the results of it, but I understood that policy.
Right. That's the point, isn't it? That once the science changed, we should have adapted. And we did. No, but actually the one thing I have learnt from this inquiry was that once we'd gone down the lockdown route, lockdown became the answer. And dissenting scientific voices that are now probably proved to be right were not given the space to argue against what became an establishment view, which Whitty and Vallance did.
Yes, lives were lost in the first 2 weeks delay. After that, any option was possible.
Okay, right. We're going to draw a line under that one because we've got a couple of other subjects I want to move on to. It's 8:46.
LBC. Aware. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:49. We have Bob Seeley, Beth Winter, Paul Drechsler and Ava Vidal with us. Peter in Coventry is on the line. Hello, Peter.
Yes, good evening to you all. My first question is, when will, as an ex-Conservative, when will the next Prime Minister, regarding this Prime Minister, Richard, at the moment, take responsibility or accountability and hand over the keys?
To what?
Well, you know the way the system works. A Prime Minister doesn't just hand over the keys on a whim, Peter. Are you saying he should call an election, I suppose?
Yes, correct, sir. That's right.
Right. Ava?
I was too busy laughing. Sorry, what was the first part of the question? Did you say
Why won't the Conservatives take accountability and just call a general election?
I don't want one. I want the Conservatives to stay exactly how they are, where they are. I want them to keep handing over the premiership. I want there to be another leadership election. I think it's hilarious. I want them to keep on doing it and doing it.
Do you not care about your country, Ava?
Oh, please. No, what I care about, nobody else cares about, so why not just stay in it for the laughs? I think it's absolutely hilarious. I want Kemi Badenoch to be next, please. And then after her, I'd like to give Kwasi another chance because he only had 38 days. And then after...
What about this new idea, a Boris and Nigel double act?
I'm not Nigel, please. No, not Nigel. No, I'm not Nigel. Boris, I would bring back Boris if I could. I would. I genuinely would.
Would you, Bob?
Don't know. I'm very happy for an early election. I'm up for that. Labour Party.
What's your majority?
Reasonable, but my seat gets split in half.
That's true, yeah. You lose half of your constituents.
I lose half my constituents. I had the biggest constituency in Britain, and I'm now ending up with the smallest in England.
Did your pay get docked for that?
No. But I never got any extra staff for all the extra caseloads, despite the fact that I had 118,000 constituents, which is twice the size of some, 3 times the size of some of the smaller Scottish seats. So,
that's quite unfair, isn't it?
Yeah, a little bit, but yeah, we just work harder. Get the job done.
Beth, how many constituents do you have?
About 50, 60.
That's half of mine.
Mine's being
Can I borrow?
split as well, yeah.
Right, so anyway, should Rishi Sunak call an immediate general election? I think you're going to say yes, so we could move on.
But it is farcical, isn't it? I mean, I've lost count of how many Prime Ministers we've now had of the Tories. And it would be funny if it wasn't so serious as well, because the fact that we've got an unelected Prime Minister yet again, the public haven't voted for Sunak.
Do they vote for Gordon Brown?
Same.
I think.
They haven't voted. Nobody's voted for Keir Starmer.
I think,
and I hope no one does.
No, and I think the political system needs fundamental reform as well. I do. I think the whole system is defunct.
Why?
On a serious note.
What would you like to see? Would you like to see PR?
Yeah, I support PR. Yeah, I live in Wales. We've got a system of PR in Wales.
Keir Starmer doesn't, though, does he?
That's Keir Starmer's decision, and we're a broad church. At our Labour Party conference, PR was voted unanimously by the membership, and like I said, it works in Wales.
To be fair, it wasn't unanimous, but
it was a majority. Yeah, but putting the political system to one side, we've got the worst cost of living crisis. It's already been said. We've got in the region of 14 million people living in poverty, including 4 million of children. The country is on its knees, and using appalling policies like Rwanda as a distraction from the crisis that faces our country is a disgrace. And yeah, we do need general election, but we also need fundamental reform.
But in all fairness, Labour are not actually going to change anything. Everything that the Conservatives have already done. When you ask Keir Starmer, are you going to pull back on this policy? Are you going to pull back? It was like, no, I'm not. So at the end of the day, we're going to have these...
No, quoting his new hero.
We're going to have... Well, exactly, Margaret Thatcher, for goodness sake. I like my Conservatives to be honest, mean-spirited, and to just be honest about who you are. I like my Conservatives to be Conservatives. I don't want Conservatives in... with a red rose. I'll keep the Conservatives that we have, thank you.
But you will vote for Keir Starmer?
Absolutely not.
You're not going to vote Labour?
No way.
But, I mean, you would have done if Jeremy Corbyn had still been leader, wouldn't you? Because you're a bit of a Corbyn
I'm not a bit...
fan.
You see, the thing is, people call you Corbyn fan
that's what your Wikipedia says,
to be disparaging. I don't know who wrote on that. They've written some awful things about me. But I honestly, right, I just don't see the difference between Keir Starmer, and I'd rather keep the Tories that we have, thank you.
So you're going to vote Tory?
I'm not going to vote Tory, I'm just not going to...
What are you going to do?
I'm going to do exactly what we did in COVID. I'm going to stay home.
Oh, no. Come on.
I'm not voting, I'm not.
You're politically engaged. How can you not vote, even if you go down and spoil your ballot paper?
Offer me an alternative to what we have already. Let's keep what we have. I really don't care. Labour need to understand you have to be an alternative to the Tories. You can't just be Tory light. That is the problem that we're having. Labour have done so many things, and I don't even want to get into it because I know the sides that are going to come from that way. But I will just say it very quickly. What they've done to the Muslim community, what they've done to the black community, it's been... They've taken our votes for granted, and we are going to show you. Actually... our votes for you are not guaranteed. We can suffer. We're from a people. Listen, my ancestors suffered. It's handed down. We've got genetic memory. I can stay and suffer under Tories for quite a lot longer.
We'll vote Green then.
No, I haven't got a Green candidate anymore.
Well, you will have. Go and spoil your ballot paper. At least make an effort to take part in the democratic process.
What?
There are people...
When I can stay in and watch Netflix.
There are people all around the world who are suffering because they do not have a democratic process where they can influence the leadership of their country. It is one of the greatest gifts in the free world. I would say 2 things, Iain. The first, this country has the best hand of cards of any country in the world in terms of its diversity, in terms of its financial services, its biotech, its fintech, its science, its universities. We have fantastic hand of cards. The only ingredient we need is leadership. What we do not need is another process that goes to 160,000 people. We don't know who they are, other than one is Archie the Tortoise, that in the Conservative Party. So we don't need another Conservative Party election of a Prime
Archie
Minister.
the Tortoise.
Archie the Tortoise is a registered Tory party member, registered by James Harding from Tortoise Media, when he was trying to find out how do these people select their Prime Minister, because nobody knows who the 160,000 are. It's not a transparent process. So if we're going to have any change in leadership, it has to be by a public election.
But you're saying that, you've got the best hand of cards. Well, there's quite a few communities who are saying, well, we can't be dealt a bad hand, and we've had enough.
That's why I think it's about leadership. We need leadership who look at all the advantages this country has and plays those that hand.
But if we've got a political party that was supposed to be our natural home, and that political party is doing things to get people, they're calling themselves a broad church, and then they're removing people with certain views. Why should they participate in their own humiliation and get thrown out? That's all that happens. Keir Starmer has expelled how many people now? It's ridiculous. I mean, people feel like they can't be a part of it.
Beth Winter, you must be sitting there thinking, oh my God, if we can't get the likes of Ava to vote for us, we're in real trouble.
I think it's really important for our leader, Keir Starmer, to listen to Ava and all the other and all the other possibly former members of the Labour Party who have now left. There are a number of us who are hanging on in, who I joined the party because of Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell back in 2016 and was elected on that manifesto, and I still stand by that manifesto of 2019, and we are pushing within the party for those progressive policies to be in the next manifesto for the next general election. But it is very concerning, and those views are shared by many, many people up and down the country, and our party does need to take note and listen to those views, because if you feel you can't vote, that is
people
very
are
worrying.
using their power. There are a lot of people, a lot of groups who are now saying that they will actually get someone in their constituency to stand against Labour because we're just not satisfied with what.
Well, I'm going to get such a slagging off here. People are going to say, how can Iain Dale turn a question on the Conservatives calling a general election into a discussion on the Labour Party? But I blame you, Ava.
I think it needed saying, so I hope the Labour are listening, because, like you said, if we can't get my vote, you're not going to get
Shall we end with a fun question from Will in Manchester? Barbie is up for 9 Golden Globe Awards this year. It must have been the best film of the year. No arguments. You'll find me making an argument, but anyway. But if the panel could pick theirs, what would it be and why? Channel your inner commodes. I was going to say commodies there, but then I realised he meant Mark Commode. Paul?
If I had to choose one today, it would be Oppenheimer, because I think it is so relevant to the state of the world today in terms of some of the issues and the geopolitical events, and the acting was brilliant.
Ava?
I have a 7-year-old and I go to see cartoons. I don't know what they're called. I don't care. The voices are annoying. I normally sit there on my phone and write my independent column while I'm in this. I'm not going to lie about that. Please check out my independent column. Thank you very much.
I'm in the same place as Ava. I tend to fall asleep during films with my children. Yeah. I think Mutant Ninja Turtles was the last one I watched with my kids. So yeah.
Well, this is taking a turn. Bob, restore some sanity to the present.
I'm not sure I'm capable to do that, but Barbie is the only film. I don't know if I should be proud or ashamed of this. Barbie is the only film I've seen this year. So on that definition, it actually wasn't too bad. If I have to,
what does this say about you? I'm wondering.
The girlfriend said we're watching Barbie this weekend, and I said, "Yep, we certainly are." But I love West Wing, and I do rewatch Arrested Development. I love Arrested Development. It just makes me.
You do realise West Wing started in 1999.
I've only just seen it.
I've actually rewatched the whole series this year.
Me too. I've done that too. I love it.
But I can recommend, I haven't seen a film this year, but I will recommend Series 5 of Virgin River on Netflix. Right. Thank you to all of you, to Bob, to Beth, to Paul and to Ava. Thank you very much indeed for taking part in our show. We'll have another one along with you next week, tomorrow. Now, Nigel Farage has suggested that he could return to politics following his appearance on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, but dismissed the idea he could rejoin the Conservative Party under Rishi Sunak. Now, the former UKIP leader finished third in the reality TV programme over the weekend after being locked in a box of snakes for his final challenge. Insert your own joke there. But there have been suggestions in the Sunday papers that he might team up with Boris Johnson to oust Rishi Sunak before the next election. Now, I think this is rather fanciful, and it would be the oddest kind of political marriage, which would inevitably end up in divorce. But I suppose stranger things have happened, haven't they?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's news